So hello and welcome back to Books and Things, and welcome to my August wrap-up. It's a little bit late, as was last month's, but there we go. I have been a bit without Wi-Fi in the last few weeks, but I am here to tell you about the books that I read in August. So yes, let's talk about the books. So August was a really atypical month for me. I had a very odd reading month. I only read 6 books, which is very, very few for me. Normally I read between 10 and 15, and I don't know what happened. I only read 6. One of them was 900 pages, in my defence, and I also had quite a busy August, and I went on holiday, and I know that for a lot of people when they go on holiday they read a lot more, but when I go on holiday I read a lot less than I normally do, because so much of my day-to-day reading time is done on my commute, so that's like 2 hours a day on a normal working day that I do reading, whereas on a weekend or when I'm on holiday I actually do a lot less reading. It's also very atypical because in the month of August I didn't read any contemporary literary fiction or any short story collections, which is very rare for me. I just read classics and fantasy and sci-fi, so there we go. It's been an odd month. But anyway, I did read quite a lot of good books. I also don't have many books to show you this month at all because I have recently moved and all of the books that I read in the month of August remain at my parents' house because I've already read them and so I didn't bring them. But there we go. So let's start off with the classics. The Thomas Hardy that I read in August, along with Alicia from Ex Libris, Anne from Beyond the Pages, and Yamini from The Skeptical Reader, we all read The Trumpet Major by Thomas Hardy, which was quite different from other Thomas Hardys to a certain extent, and one that I really enjoyed. I think I probably enjoyed it more than the other 3. I wouldn't describe it as his best. You know, with some authors like Dickens, I feel that the novels of Dickens that have become the most well-known aren't necessarily the best, whereas with Hardy, I feel like in general, the ones that have become the best well-known possibly are the best. Not completely, and I think there are some that are certainly underrated, especially ones like Desperate Remedies, but a lot of the time the lesser well-known Hardys for me aren't quite as brilliant as his best. It's not that they're not good and it's not that they're not enjoyable, they're just not quite as like mind-blowingly incredible. However, I did quite enjoy The Trumpet Major. Trumpet Major is set quite a lot earlier than other Thomas Hardy books, so it's not actually set in the Victorian period, it's set in the very early 19th century, around the time of the Napoleonic Wars. Its central character is a girl called Anne, and she effectively has 3 men who are after her in a quite typical Hardy fashion, one of whom is a man who is a trumpet major in the army, who is a sort of friend of the family and is the son of Anne's next door neighbour. Another is that trumpet major's brother, who Anne knew when she was much younger, and another is a man called Festus, who is quite a hilarious but also intimidating character, who is described as being a giant and is another man who's also in the army and after Anne in quite a kind of passionate but also slightly insane manner. I did really enjoy some things about The Trumpet Major. I think for me what I really liked about it was that the balance of humour and darkness and the move between the light and the serious. Hardy has a reputation for being very, very miserable and depressing, and that can sometimes be true. The Trumpet Major is one of his books that starts off and for the first half it feels much lighter than a lot of the rest of his books, and then this kind of impending doom almost that is under the surface throughout the whole book, the fact that everyone is so worried about Napoleon invading Britain. This kind of darkness starts to seep over the book and the second half becomes a lot more serious than the first, and I really liked that. And I liked that there are characters like Festus, who was very, very comedic and very silly at times, but also has moments where he becomes very, very sinister. So that aspect of the plot I did really enjoy and I thought was done quite well. I think there are Hardys which I found more emotionally impacting, and I don't think Anne is like my favourite heroine, but I did really enjoy the plot structure of it and the kind of shifting tones. I don't think it is the best Hardy, but it is one of his lesser well-known ones that I would definitely recommend as worth a try. I also read The Hound of the Baskervilles by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. This is actually my first Sherlock Holmes. I did really enjoy The Hound of the Baskervilles. I thought it was great fun and quite a kind of quick, easy read. It was very interesting for me to read an actual Sherlock Holmes because I really enjoy the BBC Sherlock and I really like Elementary, and I've seen films and plays, and I'm fond of the concept of Sherlock Holmes and Watson, and I always really enjoy them as characters in other things, but I've never actually read the original, so it was nice to actually finally read the original. The book opens with Holmes and Watson sat in their rooms and they're looking at a stick which someone has left behind, a visitor, and they're trying to work out who this visitor might be and what his profession might be from the stick that he's left behind. Watson makes various conjectures and then Holmes tells him that he's wrong and this is why and this is what is actually the truth, and then when the man turns up both of them are wrong, and I quite liked that. I feel like Holmes is always presented in modern adaptations as being completely infallible, and it's nice that maybe in the books he's not quite like that. But I did really enjoy Hound of the Baskervilles. It's good fun and it has a nice mystery. If you're not familiar with the story, which you probably are because it's been done enough times, it's one of the most redone Sherlock Holmes stories, I would say. There is a young man who has come into the estate of, I think, his uncle, and his uncle has died in slightly mysterious circumstances, and there is this long legend of the Baskerville family in which sort of evil hound is involved. So there are quite a lot of gothic undertones in the book, which I did quite enjoy as well. Then a more modern classic, science fiction classic in fact, that I read this month was The Chrysalis by John Wyndham. I've been meaning to read this for a very, very long time and finally got round to it and did thoroughly, thoroughly enjoy it. I thought it was brilliantly written and a really interesting concept. It's set in a kind of post-apocalyptic future. There are great problems with fertility and most people live in kind of small communities, and there is this great fear of when children are born who are not perfect. There is this idea that pervades these communities that children who are born who do not look perfectly as they think humans should be are against the image of God and therefore are unreligious and blasphemous and should be put out in the middle of nowhere and left to die. It creates this sense of fear within these communities that is very, very interesting and really, really interestingly explored. Our central character, David, as a child meets a girl called Sophie, who he becomes friends with, and realises that she has 6 toes and that her parents are hiding this and no one can know, and that there's this big secret. And it is when he realises that it must be such a big secret that he realises the kind of society he lives in and what that might mean. And David himself has always been very much considered acceptable and within the image of God. As David grows up, he realises that even if he may physically be what is considered to be the norm, he has this strange power. He can communicate with other children within his head. Anyways, the first half of the book reminded me of The Crucible by Arthur Miller, and it feels a lot like a witch hunt. It creates this massive culture of fear in this community that is really well explored and really brilliantly done. I have to say that I preferred the first half of the book to the second. The first half of the book is much more of a slower exploration of how this society works and what it means, but the second half of the book, there's a lot more plot and action, and personally I preferred the first half. When I was reading the first half, I really felt like this was one of the greatest books I had ever read in my life, and in the second half I still really enjoyed it. I thought it was brilliant, but it wasn't quite as mind-blowing as the first half, I think. But I did think it was a brilliant book and a really interesting exploration of what that kind of society might be like, of what a post-apocalyptic society might be like, of what a society that takes religion to in that way might be like. In some ways it has some similar themes and explorations to The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood, but I thought it was done like 1,000 times better, like so much better, so much more believable for me. Yeah, I thought it was a very, very good book, and I will definitely be reading more John Wyndham in the future. And moving on to modern fantasy, I also read The Magician's Guild by Trudy Canavan. I have read another trilogy by Trudy Canavan before, The Age of the Five, which I really, really enjoyed, so I quite enjoyed picking up this, which is the first in the series, and Nick had recommended the series to me, and I will definitely be carrying on because I did really enjoy the first one. Magician's Guild is set in a city where the magicians rule, and they are almost like the government or the inner circle. They hold a great amount of power within the city, and outside of the city there are these slums where a lot of people live who feel that they are very much persecuted by the magicians. And within the Magician's Guild, the only people who are accepted into the guild tend to be people from high families. But our central character, Sonia, who is from the slums and from a much more lower class, poorer background, discovers by accident earlier on in the book that she actually has magical powers, and this leads to all of the magicians in the city wanting to chase her down and find her because they don't understand why she has these powers. I did really enjoy this. I thought the social setup and the use of class in this is really interestingly done, and I like how Trudy Canavan uses this magic society to explore ideas of class. A mixture of fear and disdain that people in the Magician's Guild treat some of the people in the slums with, I thought was quite interestingly done. I liked as well that although Sonia, our main character, is I think probably about 18 years old, maybe a little bit younger, we don't really know. The other central character in this book, Lord Rothan, is much older, and it's quite nice. I feel like often in fantasy the central characters are all kind of young people between 15 and 30, and it's quite nice to have a slightly older character, and I thought he was a very, very well done character. The plot is strong in the Magician's Guild, and I really enjoyed it, and I'm looking forward to the next one. Moving on to some YA fantasy, I also read City of Ashes by Cassandra Clare, which is the third Immortal Instruments book. I did enjoy this. I find Cassandra Clare's writing very, very funny, very witty and entertaining, and very easy to get through. And for me, the Infernal Devices is a lot better than the Mortal Instruments. I enjoy the Mortal Instruments, but the Infernal Devices feels much more original and different to me, and I think her writing is better in the Infernal Devices, and they're set in the Victorian period, which I greatly appreciate. But I did enjoy City of Ashes a lot, and I think it is the best of the 3 Mortal Instruments that I have read. The plot is very strong, and the twists and turns are clever and interestingly done, and she does do the emotional side of things quite well as well. I do sometimes feel that The characters have a lot of sarcasm, and the sarcasm is done very well, but I do sometimes feel that characters are sarcastic in places where no person would be sarcastic. But there are other things that I did really enjoy about it. The plot and the villainy and the kind of mystery behind it all was done quite well. I would be lying if I said that Magnus Bane wasn't like 80% of the reason why I enjoy the Mortal Instruments series, but he is a brilliant character and there are wonderful bits. Finally, still on fantasy, but on slightly more adult fantasy, I also read The Wise Man's Fear by Patrick Rothfuss, which is the second book following on from The Name of the Wind. I love this a lot, and I think, joint with The Chrysalis, it will be my favourite book of the month. The trilogy is a frame narrative, so we have this inn in which Quoth works as an adult, and in this inn, Quoth is telling his life story to a chronicler who is writing it down. It's hard to explain too much about the second book without spoiling the first book, but I thoroughly loved it. What I really love about this series is that Patrick Rothfuss writes beautifully. I mean beautifully, and I really enjoy fantasy, but I've never read a fantasy novel that is written as beautifully as his, and I feel like in fantasy often the hierarchy goes like world, plot, characters, writing, and my hierarchy in books is like characters, writing, world, plot. Like, I love Trudy Canavan, I really enjoy her books, they're really fun, and it's not that her writing is ever bad, it's just that, like, the reason I enjoy those books is not the writing, whereas Patrick Rothfuss, his Kingkiller Chronicles, like, his writing is so utterly beautiful and so enjoyable. Every sentence feels thought out, which in a 900-page novel is really impressive. And beyond that, there is the world and the societies that he creates. His fantasy world feels so much like a real world with different cultures. I love that all of the different peoples in his books speak different languages and have different customs. There is this place that Quoth goes to where they have this social custom of giving rings, where you give a gold ring to your superior to ask them to call on you, or you give a silver ring to your equal or a bronze ring to your inferior, which I really love. He travels to another place where, rather than using facial expressions to express themselves, they use hand signals, and there's just so many little details that are so thoroughly thought out of this world that gives it such full impressiveness. It's captured so well, and they really feel like real societies and real cultures, which is something I just love. I also love, as I said, the writing style, the narrative structure is brilliant. I love frame narratives because you know that Quoth is to an extent unreliable, and there are moments that he doesn't tell in full, or there are moments he shies away from, and things that he decides that he doesn't want to delve into, and other things that he spends so long on, and you know that he is almost playing with the reader and also his audience within the book, the chronicler and his assistant. I only had one problem with this book, which was to do with the presentation of women, or more accurately I think the presentation of sex, and I found this in the first book a little bit as well. It's complicated because Patrick Rothfuss is writing about a sexist world, and his main character, who narrates a lot of the book, Quoth, is not as sexist as the world, but still at times a bit sexist. In the first book I found this like a little bit annoying, and in this book, for most of it, it's fine, but there's a section in the middle which felt very like a self-indulgent male fantasy, and I just found quite jarring. Overall, I think the book is incredible. I think I still gave it 5 stars because it is so utterly brilliant and beautifully written and such a wonderful fantasy world that I could forgive it for that bit, which was a bit annoying, but it did get on my nerves, and it just felt like Roth was just letting down the book just a little bit. But anyway, I still think it's a brilliant book, and I would highly recommend The Kingkiller Chronicles. So those are all the books that I finished in the month of August. In terms of ongoing reads, I of course read my few chapters of Our Mutual Friend for August, and I will link my video discussion on those below. I also have been listening to David Copperfield, which I have still not finished because it's 37 hours long, but it's a glorious 37 hours and I'm thoroughly enjoying it. And when I have finished it, I will make another video on David Copperfield, because the video I did on David Copperfield and What the Dickens did not cover how supreme and amazing David Copperfield is, and what a great Charles Dickens novel it is. It's so good. I'd forgotten. It's so good. But anyway, so I think that's all I wanted to say today for my August wrap-up. I'll be back fairly soon with another video, and in the meantime, happy reading, and yeah, I know August was a few weeks ago now, but let me know what your favourite book of the month was. See you soon.